Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Hagstone podcast. Today, I have the great pleasure to talk to my friend and storyteller Simon Hodges, who's in the Netherlands and is the Lindenbauer on Substack. I'm so excited to spend some time with you today, Simon.
Chase, thanks so much, man. We connected, I think, last year, and it's always I always get very excited when talking to you, and it doesn't happen enough. So lovely to have this here. Yeah.
It's great. As two dads, there's a lot of things in the way of chatting. Wonderful. So, if you are willing to, you want to just give folks a little vision into who you are and what you do in the world before we dive in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah. Just before we came on, you talked about the many threads. So I'm a dad, and I earn a, I'm a storyteller, and an oral traditional oral storyteller, and earn money as well through writing and story finding for companies, although that's shifting in quite a pleasing way. Um, but my art is certainly oral storytelling, and I'm busy and at play with the oral storytelling in the Netherlands, what the tradition is here. So yeah, that's my current activity here.
Hmm. Amazing. Beautiful. I think I'd love to hear you talk about this sort of like, being from England, but being in Netherlands and being kind of called into being a keeper of that storytelling world. Like last time we talked, that was a big part of our conversation. And I feel like a similar tension in my life here, like living in North America, growing up in North America, but having ancestral lineages from other places, and then kind of
Mm.
being called to like, you know, lovingly tease out that braid. Like, where are these stories that I'm called to tell from, and how do they interact with where I am on landscape? And that was something we talked about a little bit in the green room, like that braid between place and story that
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious like what um
Yeah, well, yesterday spring popped around
mm,
about a month early. But I mean,
mhm,
usually February there'd be this, but the temperature's gone almost up to 20 degrees.
mm,
But it's been a cold, long winter. And it was so lovely because sort of picking up my son from school, all the parents were like spent the winter kind of doing the minimum kind of social exchanges. And now they're like, hey, how's it going? How's your holiday? All this kind of
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Um, but very specifically, last week I was in a place called the Beast Boss, which is an incredible, total new opening, and it's marshland, which sits in the delta of the Vaal River, and it's just below Rotterdam for people not there. In a place, there's Dordrecht, which is the ta city above it, and that was actually farmed land 600 years ago.
mm,
And a flood came, or a series of floods came, and it flooded the dammed farmland with salt water.
mm,
And 2,000 people estimated to have died out of a population of 20,000.
mm,
And the land became untillable. They couldn't manage it anymore. And this was a whole opening of this is the place where the beaver is. You could see the beaver's
mm,
teeth in the trees, and sea eagle is there as well. But the whole time, yeah, this a transitional land of marsh, land and water, but also human and non-human. This was
mm,
it had been a cultivated place, and now it's all washed over.
mm,
And I was there with my son for a couple of days. It was sort of this lovely, playful discovery time. So
mm,
yeah, being in the Beast Boss,
mm,
wonderful area, and it's
mm,
protected. And that transitional area even goes to the point where during the Second World War, it was the borderline in 1944 between the German and the Allies, or the Allies and the Axis forces. And it was used, the locals would use it to smuggle out Allied forces across to the
Mm,
other side. So
mm,
the pilot would crash somewhere in the province of South Holland. And then they'd be smuggled by the locals across the border and into the thing.
mm,
And they're very proud of this heritage and history, sort of being
mm,
hidden, unnavigable, this kind of thing. So
mm,
talk about landscapes, that's where I've been recently. Yeah.
mm. Yeah, which is like, I love that just in, the sort of prismatic look at this one piece of landscape, we get this the whole kind of flavor of the conversation that you and I want to have around those interstitial zones between the humans and the others, and how and then the places where um these ecotones, these ecological forces are coming together to make these kind of proliferations. I live too in a like a marsh that 200 years ago had the opposite experience. It was a like oak, yeah, old growth oak forest above a marsh, this whole flat land, and then was bombed to move the water out, and then remade into farmland. So between the mountains in the east and the coast range in the west, here is this like flat expanse called the Santa Rosa Plain, um,
Mm,
and it has that you can still feel it wants to be a wetland. Like, been having these huge storms, and last week we had just this thunderstorm that fully was as if someone was picking up my house and shaking it about 2 or 3 in the morning. And the way that water moves on the landscape here, it like is constantly pushing to be a wetland again.
mm,
And you can feel it when you go and you walk out in the laguna here. And I think uh there's some relationship between that liminalness and the types of encounters that are possible here in this part of California, or this part of the county that I live in, Sonoma County, that
mm,
it's different in other places. The up in the like drier white oak forests to the east, like very different types of encounters with the liminal and the strange than happen here. Um, and you're helping me place like what it is. There's some sort of the idea of like heard Monk and Magon talk about, if like there's like the the altar, like the other world, like there's this sort of like possibility of it just like happening um
oh,
like right away.
yeah.
Yeah, or like you almost step on a turf of confusion, I've heard John Moriarty say, and then suddenly you are somewhere else.
Oh, I
But
love that.
yeah, yeah,
I love that.
um
Because that's
yeah.
beautiful. I'm so happy I know you're a big fan of John Moriarty. I'm interested in you sometimes say land and sometimes fairy. And
Hmm.
I'm interested how you see that how are they distinct or interchangeable?
Hmm.
Because, going for a walk in the woods, if we're open, and this was why I actually wanted to get in touch, why I got in touch with you, because I loved the way that you and Scott were talking in such an ordinary way. And I don't mean it wasn't engaging, but it was the ordinariness of the experience that you were lending to Encounter with Fairy. And I was like, these guys are my brothers. I mean, this is, normally it's sort of, there was no hoodoo, there was no like, in a sense and kind of the rest of it. It was so grounded and you're both very erudite guys and I was just like, this is just so, I think we're going to be okay, guys, you know what I mean, the culture's in good hands, and because it's so personal. I'm not known for people. I don't do courses in fairy encounter. I don't
Hmm.
do yeah, or haven't written any books, no academic papers to my name, but as a storyteller and I'd say a story worker as well, because the
Mhm.
telling is the outcome of the work and the relationship you build with story.
Mhm.
And the spirits of the land come forward in that.
Mhm.
And they seem to be related. And
Mhm.
you guys were drawing on Finn McCall stories, you know, Ireland keeps coming back. And how, you know, that, I mean, Finn, is some people say, well, he's a being of Faerie. In the story, say that he has Faerie, his families were Faerie. King Arthur was also had a Faerie ancestry,
Mhm.
so the stories say. And I'm interested in the naturalness of contact, going for a walk. I was there on last night, went for a walk in some woods, and we're not talking about anything particularly wild. There's a pair of woods, there's a thing of water. My son's rugby club is over the thing. He was doing his rugby practice. I took the dog for a walk, and I had a piece of a string that he had tied it around a plastic toy 2 or 3 years ago. And it had
Mhm.
laid around and no one wanted to throw away because it was kind of like a beautiful little childish creation. But 3 or 4 years ago, there's sort of laying in different things. And the string that had held that toy was on my desk where I normally sit and write and work, you know. And then, and I took that to the woods and I didn't even know why I was doing it, but I tied it to a tree.
Mhm.
And at the moment I tied it, this remembrance came up, just something that was really precious for me.
Mhm.
And I think that's where with this unknown, when the liminality is that I had no idea what it was, but my intent was, you guys are out there, I'm here, let's hang out. And then something just comes up the middle, you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And I give that as an example of sort of a concreteness, and an ordinariness that these things happen. And of
Mhm.
course, when you're Um, I remember once when I sort of someone told me, look over there, there's a fairy, and you're just like, whoa, and
Yeah.
that's so exciting and that novelty, and I never want to take that from anyone. And I still get very excited, but it's so baked down into going for a walk in the woods, you know.
Mhm.
And I once went on a course for fairy course, very wonderful lady. And but I realized I was like, oh, I'm doing this all the time, you know. This is
Mhm.
just going for a walk in the woods, you know.
Mhm.
So I don't
Mhm.
know. I think that's an interwoven aspect of encounter of beings of that inhabit a place and the place itself.
Mhm.
Is there something you want to talk to in that, or how do you see the distinction between place and the spirit of place and the spirits of place?
Yeah, that's incredible. I just really resonate first with what you're talking about. I feel that sense of, mm, this is going to sound really romantic and romantic in the William Blake realm, not romantic in Valentine's Day zone,
All
but
good.
this
Yeah.
sense of, um it's actually all about quality of perception, and attunement for me, and that it's the capacity to um actually drop down to the speed of landscape is the was for me is the key that turns where that those things be possible, where they come up the middle, and for me that it's almost impossible to unbraid land and fairy. It's like a useful distinction, but I had a lot of uncanny encounters as a child. I started seeing dead people when I was about 8 years old, and so it was around, but it was so normal because I was just a child, and there was no one to tell me that it wasn't normal. And then it kind of disappeared as I got into being a teenager and being in my life, and it wasn't until I was a young man and I started like actively trying to understand my relationship to the ecology as a human.
Yes.
I had a mentor hand me a stack of books. Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke, The Chalice and the Blade by Riane Eisler, and Becoming Animal by David Abram. Like
Wow.
all
I
at the
haven't
same
heard of the
time.
second one. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of about the deep time of civilization and the transition between um, what she calls partnership culture and dominator culture in Catalhuyuk, like around the Kurgan wave. Including this stack, I was probably about 17, and I have the copies that he gave me of all three of them still. And Becoming Animal became this Abrams book like became this um calling of like, this is a cool piece of philosophy and my brain is being totally warped by under reading about phenomenology and ontology and all these things, but how do we actually do this? Like how does one slow down enough that a shadow becomes like a viscous substance of participation that you're walking through. And so I spent, you know, pretty much from when that he handed me those books until I was 25, like running down this question of what does this look like, and
Wow.
I took taking
What
training
have you found
programs.
there? What have you
Yeah,
found in that direction in terms of
yeah,
switching time or slowing into the
yeah,
land time, we could say. Yeah.
yeah. I think my Capricorn nature will show in this, but that it's about that steady discipline of every day. And for me, it was about learning, returning to the same spots in the ecology over and over and over and over again over time, and learning the very mundane, common, or ordinary patterns of how water moves over a season, how where the beavers chew and where they don't, what birds are around at what time of year, and how they respond to each other. Um, and so there's a spot actually not down here in the plain where I live, but up in the east in the mountains, that I went to every day for a year and sat for at least an hour under this ash tree that I didn't know was an ash tree at the time, because I just stopped asking the naturalist questions. I was like, I don't need to know what the humans call these things anymore. Like, let's just learn. And the thing I think that happened, you're waking this up for me. I haven't thought about this in probably since I was like 22, so like 10 years. Um, I at some point in that process, it was in the winter, it was around now, I started falling asleep every day
Mm.
at the spot. So I'd be sitting against the ash tree, had this like butt depression because I'd been sitting in the same spot every day.
Wow.
And I started to like, as soon as I touched the ground, I would just pass out and fall asleep. And I'd wake up at some unknown time later and have to like orient myself and then run to work. And um there was something that came forward, just like a voice out of the place at the time, that what I was getting asked to do was learning how to my rational human brain that was tracking the patterns actually couldn't learn how to be place. It had to communicate with my sleeping self. um it, the part of me that wasn't going to get in the way. And it was at that time that it shifted from being only an encounter with that, like the the land, and into an encounter with um what we might call fairy, because now I was having experiences
Wow.
where I time would slow down, and like I would be in this like kind of viscous time and watching these things happen. And I remember sending voice notes to a friend of mine and being like, I don't really know what's happening to me, but like these I'm and being able to like know, okay, in about 45 seconds, this Cooper's hawk is going to fly, which is like a goshawk. It's very similar. Fly down this ravine and it's going to explode out this way. And then it would happen, kind of things like,
What? Wow. Wow.
And so I think that to connect back to the romantic to William Blake, like seeing angels or seeing little green men or um seeing the face of the depths, like that was an ordinary experience for someone like William Blake. Like that was his just tromping around London. He didn't have to like, you know, burn incense and get into some deep trance state. Like,
Yes.
he was seeing angels from about 5 or 6 years old, just in the trees, and
Yeah.
there's something about the quality of the dreamer's perception that when you go deep enough into landscape, like into the, people have this experience in the backcountry all the time, like things start to happen that are beyond what we think is real.
So this is where what you've been saying about William Blake is exactly what I think we're talking about because I mean it's so relevant to the Netherlands because the Netherlands is a highly cultivated place. It is the thumbprint of humanity all over it. It's there's no real wild places, and in fact, the Netherlands they love their forest called the Veluwe. That's 200, 300 years old. And that
Mm,
was planted after the land had been rid of peat. It had been all the peat had been ripped up, burnt in people's houses,
mm,
and and a place where I live is also related to peat burning. This the name of the town I live in is called Barn, and that is the place of the burning. So
mm,
and that the place of the burning is not because it was always on fire. It was where the peat was taken out from nearby, was put by the side of the river, and then picked up and sailed on elsewhere. That was the
mm,
barn. And we're
mm,
talking that name's about 1,000 years old. So it's a lovely way
mm,
of life embodied in that. Um, so even the wild places, and even, I was there in the Bispas, natural place, was cultivated 600 years ago.
mm,
And so the association with fairy or wild encounter, which is so precious to us because it means an openness of the imagination. It means going beyond the everyday. It means opening myself up to a reality that's bigger than that humility, that their reality is bigger than I can hold in my head. Can you offer me something that I may live well?
mm,
And coming from Martin Shaw's School of Myth on Dartmoor, and just being a lover of landscape and hill walking and stuff like that. Living here, how could I cross that? And storytelling the stories themselves has been very vitally a way to navigate a cultivated place, but still this intelligence that wants to bubble up from the moss and the trees and the younger forests. It's still all there, right?
mm, mm,
And so how do we use story? Before I get into that, I want to say that you talked about quality of perception, and it's also to do with quality of intent. When we're going into these encounters, and it's the same with any encounter, right? Is um, who are you for me? What am I turning turning you into for my convenience? What could you be actually? And why am I having this conversation? Why
mm,
why am I here? And the Buddha said, do not listen to any teaching that doesn't resonate you. It was I don't know the actual text. Sorry, scholars, um, but it was to do with if it doesn't speak from your heart, then it's not a teaching. And that level of responsibility, the not willingness, the not wanting to, not giving ourselves away to someone, not
mm,
pleasing anyone, showing up with a responsibility, and knowing who we're accountable to. This
mm,
is such important boundaries of this encounter
mm,
because in what way, I was thinking, in what way am I responsible to my uncle, for example?
Mm.
I think it's like that if I'm talking about an accountability to Faerie.
Hmm.
If I go stay in his house, it's not my house. And there will be a distance and a respect and a deep love and affection between me and my uncle. Love to
Hmm.
see the books on the walls. There are some rooms I can't go into, some rooms I don't want to go into, you know. And that love, respect, understanding of how much he's woven into my life. There's an uncle who I've from lived in Canada for many years, saw him, 2 or 3 times a decade for 30, 40 years. And I grieved bitterly when he died. He wasn't part of my everyday life. And I think that sort of familial, close but not close relationship is what I'm thinking about in order to get a sense of how I should approach that encounter.
Mm. Yeah, that resonates really, really deeply. Where that sense of um, responsibility and understanding that type of interconnection, and it isn't the same kind of relationship as the everyday people or the relationship that my kids have with me. Like, if I'm gonna, you know uh like, there's a way in which, and I think that story, I love that we're going to go there. Like, story has been a great teacher of that for me, to watch the types of relationships that folks have with fairy, or any type of other being, and learn some of the dance steps of what it means to be in relationality. um but I, in my practice with other the others, when I haven't lived up to the style of responsibility that the particular beings call forth or need, the breakdown of those responsibilities has like actual deep implications, and it's not always what's not pleasant to to
Can you give some
ha-
example? Can you put some bones
yeah.
on? Because
Yeah,
it's
for
an
for
important point.
example, a few years ago, we have, living in California, the our relationship with the water cycle, especially in this like global climate weirding, is so fraught. And so I was doing a um I was doing a poetic magical working over a 2 week period where I was writing as much poetry, magical poetry, like skaldic poetry, as I could, to give as an offering to the Disir. So it's around this time of year, actually, to the these land goddesses. Um, and in the process of this, um, magical working that I was doing, uh, I was sitting under a hazel tree, and I got this poem from the hazel tree, that ended up being a charm, like a usable charm, and along with it was like this instant um, image from the hazel tree that, like, if you do this thing, if you make this particular talisman out of blue yarn and 9 strands from this hazel bush, then the dragon who lives in my roots will crawl into it and bring and always answer and bring water if you do these particular things. It was like this instantaneous download. Like, here we go, I'm ready. And I was actually working in the woods. I was running a fantasy role playing camp, and the kids were arriving, and I'm like under this tree trying to snip the things and make offerings so I can run back to the parking lot and go grab my kids for the day we're gonna have. And 15 wild teenagers who are in the woods, like, playing Dungeons and Dragons all day. And um and so I spent the whole it took me about 3 days to make this talisman, because I had the image but not the design. So I'm like trying to figure out how to knot the yarn and how to make it shape the way it wants, and it wants a hagstone as its head. So now I have to like find a hagstone. So I'm going on all these quests, and um, finally it was completed, and I sung the charm over it the amount of times I was told to, and it just came alive. It was just this dragon that was now living in my garage in my office. Um, and every once in a while, it would give me like a pretty friendly but dragony nudge, like, "Hey, like I need some offering. Like, here's the things I need. Go get them." Um,
Wow.
and at a certain point, just in the wild unfolding of a life with three kids, I stopped listening to the information. Like, hey, I need an offering. Hey, I need something.
Ah,
Um, and it started, and I just started to completely ignore it to the point where I couldn't hear it anymore. And I had such a significant series of misfortunes in that period. I fell and got concussions.
wow.
My car got totally one of our cars got totaled. The other car had to be
Now, hang
have all
on.
this work
Hang
done.
on. Was
Yeah,
that in the process of making it, or you made it and then you had
I
the accident?
I made it, and then it was all
The accident.
groovy. It was all groovy, and then I stopped feeding it. I stopped doing my obligations, and then
Oh,
all of these things happened. Um, and of course, you can tell a million different stories about why these misfortunes are happening, but it became clear that something was happening with this dragon that was living in my garage. And so I had to, yeah, through a pretty intense process, release this thing back into a storm. There was a spring storm um, last
wow.
year, so it was a while. And and what it was this moment of really learning the hard, well, one of the many moments I've had recent in the last years of like learning the hard way what it means to actually take on responsibility with something other. um and what happens when you don't continue to show up, when you leave your uncle's house a mess, or you take his books without asking, or don't
Yeah.
bring you don't bring the tea he likes, or whatever the thing is that you do with your uncle, you know um and
Not like not bringing the tea he likes. I don't have that relationship, but yeah, you're definitely sensitive to their and again we're back to that the otherness of that, right?
mhm, yeah.
It's such an intense experience you've just shared. I thank you so much. Yeah, it's sort of actually the way I have it is like, listen, you've got something now. We've given you something, right?
Mm,
And you're going to this place that we've seen for you. And you can either do it the smooth way with a kind of a little carry on with offering, but if you're not, we're going to take you there, and it's going to go the other way.
mhm,
And like
mhm,
you're going through that experience, and I think if we get Fairy to obey any kind of personal wish or convenience, that's when it goes awry. And it's the
mhm,
taking it personally or thinking that we're going there for a personal experience or that it's going to
mhm,
conform to any kind of idea.
mhm,
I mean, that's what the idea of, yeah, unknowing, real unknowingness doesn't mean
mhm,
ignorance. It's the
mhm,
best that you can do at that point. And I think there's an element of compassion that comes into these encounters. Yeah.
mhm, mhm,
They're so, I was actually wondering, maybe that's a good moment to share the story about this relationship to taking things personally, because there's
mhm.
a story from the Netherlands, which is to do with that. Is that now a good time?
It's a great time. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So you probably know that around the Netherlands, the time the first people came, it was a time when they ate from the trees, and their diet consisted almost entirely of acorns and honey. And outside the villages, roving around, was a fairy called Fro. And he rode on the back of a pig with huge tusks, big wild, should call him a boar, really. And he wanted to show the people that there was food underground. He said, honey's nice, but acorns? Seriously, guys? So he took his pig and the pig dug great big funnels into the ground, big, hoed the ground, plowed the ground with his tusks. And then Fro would come along and threw in some seed, and then he'd offer his magic to it. And in the space of a day, there rose the wheat. And being the good fairy he was, and this being a time when fairies and people often spoke to each other, showed them how to take the wheat, grind it down into flour, and that flour could be mixed with water into dough, and that could be baked and make this delicious, warm bread, often eaten straight out of the oven. And the fragrance of that would come back to the fairyland, and that fed them. So Fro and his tribe were happy. And the children would eat these bread and just, it would give them so much life. And they just had so much fun together because of this bread. And the women, in this very, I know a lot of male bakers, but this is in the story. The women says the women would bake the bread, and the children ate the bread and would play. And the men saw that the women and the children were happy, and they got jealous.
Mm.
They got jealous. They made it personal, and they saw the tusks of the boar and thought to themselves, that boar's getting quite a lot of attention. How could we somehow reinsert ourselves into this conversation? And they made out of their metal work, which they'd just started mastering at the time, a plow in the exact same shape as the tusks of the boar. And they plowed the ground, they threw in the wheat, and the wheat popped up beautiful, plumes of wheat berries. And that was taken away and it was ground down and it made this delicious bread. But the children didn't play in quite the same way. And the women were happy with the bread, but as the generations rolled on, the memory of how it had been before faded somewhat. And the fairy Fro, seeing that the men had provided the tusks for themselves, faded from that place.
Mm.
And they've been fading from the Netherlands ever since.
Wow. There's like so much moving in that story. Might like feel that brokenheartedness of a good story told. Um, mm, the place that really caught me is that, which was apt because we were talking about taking it personally, but that moment when uh, the joy of the women and the children is not enough, and that sense of the men that, but I want a slice of that too,
Making it
and
about them, yeah.
making it about them, and seeing the tusk and trying to, you know, remaking it. I just, what a the personal theme gets so intense in there for me as a parent and a person navigating the world now as a man. Um, and I'm so
Because we always
curious.
want that slice
Yeah,
for themselves, don't we? We always
yeah,
like, oh yeah, but can I just have a bit for me? Like, can
mm,
you just cut me off a slice, like a bit more
mhm,
than you are? Like, no, bit bigger, please. Come on.
yeah,
Like, I'm doing the work. I'm out there raising the kids, making them laugh, even when I'm tired. Doing the runs, paying the bills, doing the thing. Stacking up all
yeah.
these things. And can I please just have a little slice for myself?
Hmm.
Just like I want that aura
Hmm.
that's been offered so sort of generously, this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's a psychological metaphor. But for the
Mm-hmm.
purpose of this conversation,
Yeah.
and doesn't it show how beautifully interwoven, if you talk about fairy and psychology, there's actually nothing you can
Yeah.
put between them because they're just,
Mm-hmm.
spinning around, they're just tangled with one each other. You can't disentangle them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not about us.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what Land Encounter does. It's
Yeah.
not about you. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
me. It's about
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
this place, how it sees, how it feels like you going out every day um, for years to learn the being of the place and let it be learned in you in very specific, practical ways,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the willingness to be aware that there's something beyond the little box, the doors of perception that
Mm-hmm.
we carry around, to be with William Blake again.
Mm-hmm.
It's just even the willingness that it's not all that. That is enough to invite an encounter which is deeply beneficial and nourishing. And as I say, as we've said, but yeah, my experience of this place where I walk, I can't disentangle it from Encounter with Fairy because there are just too many things that are so surprising, magic, subtle. It's not just me staring at my navel, it's
Mm-hmm.
changed
Mm-hmm.
things in my life very
Mm-hmm.
seriously, very beautifully, often with a signature of joy.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly when it comes to storytelling, it's funny because the story is often the key for these encounters, because again, a story is saying, with that story has been passed mouth to ear, yeah, mouth to heart, really, through so many people. And the origins of these stories we know are tens of thousands of years old. What you call the simplest folk story has migrated forever. And because just the acknowledgement of that story is beneficial, is enough to walk over a bridge where the fairy can go, oh, this person's looking at things in a slightly, with let's say, an enlarged sense of self, as in they don't see themselves as just a walking box on legs with a
Mm-hmm.
certain thoughts or emotions. They know they're not just that. Well, let's have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And you've had very concrete ways of, this is how we're going to have this conversation. And so, isn't it wonderful how often how creative that conversation is? You know, how to make
Mm-hmm.
a beautiful, the dragon of the roots came into this form that you made.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's you know, yeah, that when the doors are, I love the power of story both to enchant, right? Like I'm enchanted by the way you chant a story. It like pulls me into um a certain sort of resonance or rhythmic space um in the um uh shape of the music of it, but then also that enchantment, it's less about ensorceling and more about cleansing. Like William Blake says, if I could, if the doors of perceptions were cleansed, I would see things as they are, infinite. And that the enchantment is actually more like a washing than it is like a
Oh, lovely.
capture. And that, yeah, then when I wake up from the enchantment of the story, there's that, like you're saying, I'm no longer a box with legs. I'm actually something completely different than I thought I was before I heard that story. um
Wow.
and that thing is somebody who's like there's this, actually what comes up is the longing. It's like, oh, I long to be watching, to be there, to be humble enough to watch the joy of those children and the baking of the bread. Like that's what comes up, is just this longing. And then there's a way in which I think the good folk or the fairy like they respond to longing. If we listen to the stories, like that's again and again they show up when there's longing. and
Hmm.
and so yeah, I love that it's this courtship and this opening of a doorway. um and I wonder how much it is. David Abram talks about how um language is an organ of perception, right? Like that our perception isn't always these things, but like language is an organ of perception. So to allow uh that story, Fro and the boar, to come, and the bread and the joy and all these things to come out of your mouth into a room, uh allows the perception of fairy. Like there's some relationship between the storyteller's tongue and the opening of the doorway to fairy that
Okay.
um
Okay.
maybe I don't this is musing, but it makes me curious about what a storyteller is for. Perspective of the landscape, or from the perspective of fairy. Like what is the storyteller for?
Yeah.
Why do we have yeah, why do we tell stories from their perspective, not from ours? Because I have all of my ideas about why I tell a story, and why, you know what I'm attempting to support, transform, battle, whatever it is, by telling particular stories. But then if I, like you said, go into that bigger vision of self that's interwoven into landscape, like what am I for in that moment? What is my purpose from the outs from the vision of the others? Like maybe it is opening people back up to the possibility of
Uh-huh.
encounter that they've
Uh-huh.
been shut down to. Um, yeah.
That's nice and tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Thinking a lot about Jan Blake.
Mm-hmm.
She would often say, who has often said, what would I know about your life or living any better than anyone else? I'm not going to burden myself with that position.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And she, her stories are so deeply sacred.
Mm-hmm.
They, a whole room is just brought into a space of wonder. It's brought into wonder when she
Mm-hmm.
tells stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I can answer your question from all the literature and Joseph Campbell quotes Plato about his those experience. I can't remember it exactly, but it's those that our experiences knock us off balance, and the
Mm-hmm.
myth brings us back to an original sense of self, to original self.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the fact that it's the stories themselves are not of an individual.
Mm-hmm.
It is the most fundamental property of oral storytelling. You've already gone beyond. If you're in any way paying attention to the story, you have to be aware that this is not you talking.
Mm-hmm.
There's more, the more than. So then we're back into the more than human, and that's a lovely place of mystery. And that's where, probably from the eyes of Faerie, he says, from God knows where, but wouldn't it be the case that if you're also find it impossible to see yourself as an individual, just as a distinct thing, that people who are ready with a certain language, with an awareness, however falteringly, that there's more to them than just um, my thoughts, my feelings, my body, that we could get into a conversation. I think it's as far as I could probably go to do.
mm,
It's as far as we need to go, I think, with
mhm, mm, mm,
story, fairy encounter, and how it helps.
mm. There's a sense of the faltering seems to me to be actually the key ingredient. If I'm telling a story in front of a room of people, um, as soon as I trip, um, and realize I don't know what's coming next, or I missed a bit of the story, or I didn't really like what just happened, that's when the magic happens for me as a
Ah,
storyteller, in the room, because what I realize is I have to do something more like what Tolkien did with Middle Earth, which is to walk into the place and report back instead of speak from my notes. So if I'm telling, I was so faltering. We did Bridget's La Felibrige, and I was telling some Bridget stories all linked up together um in the beginning of the month. And we had this experience where, you know, 8 people RSVP'd and 95 people showed up, and that's
what?
that's an experience to falter at, I think. And I was up there telling the story, and I had no idea what I was gonna say.
Yes.
Because there's so, how do you speak about uh a saint, goddess, woman, daughter of fairies? Like, what do you even say about someone like that? And I was telling the story, and uh, I totally stubbed my toe walking into the story. There was just, I stumbled so hard into it. And then, but in the it makes me think of Robert Bly, like growing my wings on the way down. I was falling down in front of everybody, and then something just like caught me, and the story then became this terrain that I could walk through. And I was prowling around the room trying to like figure out what was next, and was trying to stand next to different people to see it from their perspective, and it became, you know, such an experience, of what I hear Tolkien talks about with Middle Earth. Like, I'm walking through this story right now with you in the room, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, but we're all here together, and let's
Wow.
see what we can do.
Oh my
Um,
God. That's so vulnerable. Do
yeah.
you remember as you were talking, that stumbling and growing your wings on the way down? Did you ever see Patti Smith when she sang at Bob Dylan's Nobel Prize Award? Did you ever see that? So
Mm,
Bob Dylan was given the Nobel Prize for Literature. Didn't want to show up because he later said he was overwhelmed, but also he's Bob Dylan, and I thought it was kind of cool. He's just like, yeah, Nobel Prize. And Patti Smith um, sang uh, one of his songs. What have you been, my darling? That one. Um,
mm,
and she was doing it this thing, and she stumbled, and she
mm,
said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so nervous." And the crowd all clapped like this,
mm,
and like she'd sung it well up until then.
mhm,
But the moment she started singing afterwards, this thing just came. Oh,
yeah.
the old the the old sage started singing and the
Mm,
place just erupted. Like I'm
mm,
actually gonna after this call, I'm gonna go away and watch it because it is so. And I remember showing it to my mum and she was just pouring with tears,
mm,
this just look at this, mum, look at this. And it was just too much. And the fact that Bob Dylan had written that as a young man and he was Patti Smith as an old woman, and she had
mm,
heard it as even younger than Bob Dylan, and she had heard
mm,
it and carried his song with her whole life. All of that was pouring through this accumulated
mm,
experience.
mm,
And yeah, the faltering is, yeah, I love that. Maybe that's part
mm,
of it. It's the lack of control. You're
mhm,
in a place where you're given. immediately sense of lack of control. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and then you have to allow, like we were saying before, you have to allow there to be something bigger than you in that moment. Like
Mm.
when I fail in all my designs as a storyteller, but I still have to tell a story because there's people in the room and we're doing something together, and I'm not going to leave them. That I have to allow there to be something bigger than me. It reminds me a lot of, I grew up um, performing a lot of Shakespeare at a Shakespeare theater and here in California, and also doing improv and improv troops. And that place where if I falter in the text, if I'm doing Romeo and I falter in the text, I know that the text is bigger than me, and so I can wait and allow either someone to save me because someone knows the next line, or the text to return,
That's so good.
because part of what you're doing is you're telling the truth through the words. And I teach Shakespeare now at the Waldorf
Oh,
School,
all
and
right.
we just we did a Hamlet variety show last week because we didn't have time for the whole play, and we are preparing, and I have all these 16 and 17-year olds with the verse in their hand and trying to find what we're doing and stage it and get ready to perform, and walking around, and the only note I could give is tell the truth. Like, what's the truth? When he says, Nay, madam, I know not seems. Like, I am sad, mother. Like, what does that mean, to you? Like, the truth of that. And the words are just the dressing on top of the actual truth of, like, my love makes me o'erleap these garden walls. Like, what does that mean? Have you ever been that in love? Can you tell the truth here and not just
Wow.
like parrot the text? And I think that there's a way in which my experience of or being an oral storyteller is that, but I don't have a text to fall back into. I have the voice of whatever's dictating to fall back into, and it's a little bit scarier because I don't know what's going to come if I fail. Like,
Isn't that you've answered? I mean, that's the answer to your question. Like, what are storytellers for? Is to tell truths,
mm-hmm, yeah,
is to be honest
mm-hmm,
and allow that the truth of that perspective, that moment, to speak through the story. I just love that that's in your work, and I will take that forward from this call. That, yeah, the intent of the story, and it doesn't mean being literal.
mm-hmm,
So, yeah, let story be story,
mm-hmm,
but yeah, to allow truths to speak. Yeah, through
yeah.
many different mouths, many different ways that we can't always clearly see and can be allowed to be revealed to us. So
mm,
not any kind of didacticness. But when you say truth, I love it. It's showing up to that line of Shakespeare with the fullness of your own being, with the honesty of being as lapsed as we are, as beautiful as we are, as easy and as difficult as we are, and
mm-hmm,
then and staying honest. What's this, and how is it for me? Safeguard, if we bring it around to fairy encounter,
mm-hmm,
because yes, the attitude to story and being swept up in different flavors of thought, a meeting of different people within the story, the people that we talk about in the story, an awareness of the ancestral nature of the story, its relationship to land, this kind of thing that, in my lover's swoon, I just adore. And I love storytellers that bring all that together. It just, when you feel it, it's just such warm soup being poured through my body, if that sounds comfortable. It sounds comfortable to me.
mm-hmm,
Not being burned, warm soup.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. And the engine of that is truth.
mm-hmm,
I keep wanting to say truths.
yeah,
The honesty, yeah, the truth of what you're saying and bringing and
mm-hmm,
feeling to it. And with a fairy encounter, there's smelling intent. There's a smelling of intent of what's there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that's no different to the rest of life, actually.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. Yeah.
life tells us and me, saying touch wood to ward off anything, but life shows me what I'm missing. And it's up
Hmm.
to me to open my ears and, open my eyes to find out, what, okay, that didn't work out as planned. Have I learned enough from it? Have I seen it? And all this kind of thing. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah.
And that's why I like you
Yeah.
always distinguishing romanticism in different senses. And the romanticism in the wrong sense is a blindness, is love is blind, just sort of
Mm.
going, I'm after the words, have my encounter with the fair folk and actually sort of making up something that you've had that feels or seems like something like that. It's great, you
Hmm.
can have that, but then what are we bringing back?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And there's this one thing that's just hovering, which I was speaking to on the podcast a while ago to a friend, Rose Aurora, who's works with the fairy. It's her specialty. And
Oh,
one of the things that she brought forward that just landed here in this conversation, so it seems like it's a through line. So I just want to touch it, which is that the one of the taboos in the fairy folklore, particularly in Ireland, is that if you're a person with relationship with fairy, the taboo that falls upon you is that you can only speak truth. And if you slip out of that taboo, that relationship will be um, pulled back from by the good folk. And that feels really apt. And it's been a challenge for me as a storyteller because there's a way in which storytelling can get painted as telling untruths, but you're helping me remember that actually, like with Shakespeare or like with any poem, I can speak truth through any words,
mm,
and the truth will put, and life, like you're saying, will put some limits and parameters around what words I'm most like to use that are
yeah.
closest to the intention of the truth that I'm speaking. But the quality of truth can come forward in with any mask if we're following the scent of that honesty. um and I think that there's something so I'm so grateful for the way that you've framed this conversation because it's helped me to see that what we're talking about when we're talking about truth and offering and enchantment, like very um these are like wayfinding tools for our time, like to attune to, and I'm really grateful for that.
Wow, man. Well, I've just absolutely love this conversation with you, and I really wish I'd had you to teach me Shakespeare when I was a kid. Those classes sound amazing.
Mm.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing all your amazing experiences you're having and threads of the wonderful life you live. So lovely to share time and space with you, and also what I love about these conversations is there's kind of a feeling of presence of the people like who might be listening as well, and
Mhm.
it's lovely sharing time with listeners too. Yeah.
Mm. Indeed, it is. Before we hop out of the Zoom portal, is there any places you want to plug, ways people can connect with you, or things you have coming up that you want people to know about?
Yeah, come and hang out at the Lindenbauer. That's where I'm putting most of my work and the both explicit and implicit encounters with fairy go on there. Mainly implicit, but the art that I'm producing and those are, resulting from walks in the forest around here in Barn. I'm into a very specific inquiry about the myth in the Netherlands and
Mhm.
by going into its stories. And that's what the Lindenbauer is. It gives me a lot of pleasure to do that. And if you are in the Netherlands, on the 21st of March, on the equinox, first day of spring, Nowruz in the Persian calendar, There's a lot of Iranians in the Netherlands. I I'm having a day of storytelling. It's an afternoon and evening called the Shelter of Story, and that's yeah. Yeah, it's similar to what you said about the baking in the land. I love long story sessions when you have time to tell stories, go for a walk in the woods, come back, there's sharing, there's food, there's more stories, that layering on, that kind of that's what that's about. Yeah. So being alone together. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I'll make sure all those links are in the notes. And thanks again for getting on today.
Thanks, Chase. It's such a pleasure.